Hello, you are listening to an archived worship service of First Presbyterian Church, Columbus, Mississippi. Thank you for listening.
In our passage today, Jesus returns after a short trip across the pond, or the Sea of Galilee. He left to get away from the Pharisees who were hounding him and making plans against him. He left the crowds debating him, and he left because his family was bugging him to cut it out. But he left. He went across the lake to a foreign land, the land of the Gentile. And it was while he was on this trip, he calmed the sea. He cast out a demon or demons. And he escaped another crowd begging him to cut it out. Jesus' touch brought him into conflict everywhere he went. Whether it was in his hometown or his home people, his home crowd, even the people who were not of his own kin. Jesus' touch brought him into conflict with the powers of religion and with the powers of nature, the powers of evil and the powers even of family. Almost everything Jesus touched birthed conflict in a world that was utterly unprepared for his presence. That's the first 5 chapters of Mark. And suddenly Mark presents the tale of 2 daughters, 2 stories of healing neatly woven together. One, a father's beloved, a dying child of 12. A daughter on the edge of adulthood. The other, a forgotten, neglected, unnamed, lost to her family and society, slowly, painfully dying since adulthood had begun. Sick and hurting as long as this little girl had been alive. Both dying, both daughters, both desperate. Desperation, thankfully, is not the place most of us live. But it is certainly a feeling that we all know. You can think back, and I imagine you already are, to those moments in life that you felt most desperate. Whether it be on behalf of another, as a father scans the seashore for his last hope, desperately waiting on a boat that might not return in time. Fearlessly throwing himself on his face and begging for help. Or whether it is of self-concern, a last-ditch effort made by a woman at the end of her rope, finding failure in every part of society. She tussles with the crowd to find some relief. We know these 2 stories. We've lived these 2 stories. 2 daughters, 2 dying and desperate daughters. And finally, in Mark's gospel, Jesus is wanted. Robert Capon was an Episcopal priest and author who served up in New York State for many years and recently passed away. He wrote a book not terribly long ago called Between Noon and 3. These words were written in that book. Jesus came to raise the dead. The only qualification for the gift of the gospel is then, therefore, to be dead. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be good. You don't have to be wise, and you don't have to be wonderful. You don't have to be anything. You just have to be dead. That's it. This woman braved the crowd out of fear and trembling because she knew she was as good as dead. And the father, the synagogue leader, who would have had those Pharisees who were after Jesus staying in his house probably, defied all of that to go fall on his face on the sandy beach out of fear and trembling for his little girl because he knew she was as good as dead. There is a quality of the gospel that can only be recognized in moments like this. Moments when our other gods fail. Finally, completely, and utterly fail, and one remains. When money is gone, when power is useless, when death is all you see, one hope is there. That is where we are with these two desperate daughters. I shared a cup of coffee not long ago with a young lady in her early 20s. Now, society would call her a millennial. The Pew Research Facility would call her a nun. That is, not religiously affiliated. And as we sat down, she blurted out, "I want you to know I don't believe in God, but I have a question that I wanted to ask a preacher." Recently, two disastrous events had happened in her life. One was a health concern for her personally, where doctors didn't have the answer for weeks. The other was a chaotic period where no information came following a car accident of a good friend. She said both times she felt something inside of her cry out, and something that felt kind of what she imagined a prayer would look like. They were both real and both sincere from the guttural honesty of the soul. She asked what I thought about that. I told her that I didn't think her first sentence was correct any longer. I told her that I believed she believed. But I wondered what that belief was. I wonder if she actually trusted God or just imagined someone far, far away. I wondered for her what her soul crying out meant. I wondered for her if these were moments which her faith might actually be strengthened. After all, she was a self-proclaimed atheist, now having coffee with a Christian pastor. I wondered if Christ had touched her in some way, reanimating her trust, finding her among the dead and dying, in order to open her to some measure of hope. And as I talked to this millennial nun, I wondered how many of us can identify with her. How many of us have difficulty trusting God until all of our other gods have failed us? These two daughters desperate, dying daughters stand in stark contrast to the crowds who wish Jesus to leave. The religious folks who wish he would cut it out, and the family who wish he would just come home. Father Capon is on to something. Something the early persecuted church knew, and we modern, convenienced, and comfortable Christians have forgotten. That is, to be baptized, feeling the touch of water upon us, is to die with Christ. It is part of what we say and do and mean when we come to the font. Now, we often forget that. We often forget that our faith begins with death. A cross. We wish to race by the Good Fridays and the Holy Saturdays of faith and break into the empty tomb of Easter morning too quickly. But resurrection, new life, is our hope. And without death, it is meaningless. It's what Karl Barth meant when he said that it all has to begin at the foot of the cross. We have to begin with death to truly appreciate and understand new life. And that means in those crisis moments, and that means on your average Tuesday afternoon. Resurrection, new life is our hope, but it becomes cheap without death. Faith cannot flourish. We cannot truly live. We become the masses unready for the message Christ brings. We must know death. Christ says to the two desperate daughters, one through the Father, do not fear, only believe. And your faith has made you well. If we could hear these words in the everyday of life and not wait for the crisis or the chaos to drive us to our knees, our face in the sand, or our clutching in the crowd, or this despair that makes us reach out for one last grasp of hope. What if we lived each day knowing that we are dying to this world? Would it change us? Would it do incredible things as it does in the Gospels? It changes a crowd that would run Jesus off into a group begging him, please, come to my house. Please, just one touch. What if we lived each day knowing that we are dying to this world and in faith did incredible things? Like tell our whole story in front of crowds of strangers, even the scary parts. Or if we fed those who are hungry, because God cares for the needs of the whole body. He cares for our wholeness. Or if we simply acknowledged something that is found deep down, welling in us somewhere in our gut, that's trying to get out and trying to tell us, and it only takes those moments of chaos for it to come bubbling up. What if we heard the message of Jesus even when that was not true? But you do have faith that God can and will work in this world, even when the world is not falling apart around you. What if Christ's touch here today gave you a new hope that took you out into the world to be a new person? I say let us be about the good work of dying. Feeling Christ's touch and celebrating each day with the daughters and the sons who find life and new life, who find a deepened faith, and who find that quality of the gospel that is only understood when we say we are dying. Amen.